It is my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker today, Michael Hammond. Michael is a thought leader in agile leadership and has coached dozens of Fortune 500 companies and teams and hundreds of leaders and team coaches towards greater holistic team and enterprise level agility. His book, Evolve Agility, Growing an Agile Leadership Culture from the Inside Out, provides a blueprint of what it means to be an agile leader in today's complex world and offers a practical roadmap for getting there. Before I give the floor to Michael, I would like you to know that we are using Mentimeter for Q&A. I'm putting this link in the chat, and you can also see the QR code on screen, and you can use the QR code as well. So there's the link in the chat. So without further ado, Michael, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. I wish I could say I'm glad to see you because I can't. I can see a few of you. These are the days of post COVID. But anyways, I'm glad that you're here and thank you for being here, including those who I know, those who I sort of know, and those who I have not yet met. So thank you for being here. Thank you for giving your time. I consider it to be a generous offer, so thank you for that. So this is going to be, I suspect it might be kind of different than what you may be used to. I don't know, it's a sort of an assumption that I'm claiming right now. And it's a bit different for me. And what I try to do with these sorts of sessions is to create an experience in which people learn something, not just conceptually, but experientially, or dare I say, existentially. And in a sense, what this talk is about what does it mean to exist, as agilists. And so it will invite us to look at some kinds of questions that we don't ordinarily look at, or at least many of us don't. I do, but even I don't very often, quite frankly. So I'm going to take us through some slides, and we're going to pause as we go along to do a bit of work together. And there should be plenty of time for a kind of Q&A, which I really regarded as a time to have a conversation. So what I want to do in this first part is I want to sort of like elicit some questions or elicit some sort of maybe perspectives that we can then discuss. And for me, much of the real action happens in that second part when we have a conversation. And as I go along, I'm going to be inviting you in from time to time. You'll be doing some little activities, some little experiential exercises, experiential in the sense that I'll be asking you to reflect on some questions. So this session is really, I want you to take this personally. So this is not going to be big on conceptual information, although there is conceptual stuff here, but the real thrust of this is to help us have a way to think about things or to look at things maybe in a slightly different way than we're used to. So I'm going to move into screen sharing mode, and it's always so odd the way this works so I want to start. So I'm going to kind of trace a sort of narrative here, or tell a kind of story, not a story about someone, but a story. It's more like a story that tells the tale of the evolution of an idea. And so a long time ago, back before the dinosaurs, there was this book called The Inner Game of Tennis. And some of you who are my age or near my age may remember this book. I certainly do. And the thing that was remarkable about this book is it didn't say anything about backhands or forward hands, or, I mean, I don't know anything about tennis. I'm just making stuff up. By the way, is it okay to curse? Use swear words? Okay. Oh,
Uh, I suppose.
well, nothing really extreme, but just sort of, okay, good. So, see, I don't know anything about tennis. But the thing about the inner game of tennis is that it wasn't about the outer game of tennis. It was about what's the nature of the state of mind called for when one is playing tennis masterfully. And this has been the nature of the way in which I have approached Agile more generally. So I've been in the Agile world since actually before the very first Agile conference, since the only Agile conferences there were the XP conferences. So back in 2001 is when I first started going to Agile conferences, at which point I'd already been kind of coaching small teams in what I understood to be Agile. So I've been around this for a very, very long time and started and was among the sort of the pioneers that introduced Agile into corporate environments back in 2003, 2004. So, but my angle on agility really has been the question, what's the inner game of agility? And so we could evoke this classic. Of course, what would any presentation be without an iceberg picture and a metaphor, right? So here we go. The one for this session. The outer game of agility is like that aspect of agility that we can see. And it's typically the aspect of agility that we talk about more than anything else. Now, we might allude to other aspects of agility, but we don't talk about it with the same degree of informed expertise, I guess you could say, as we do when we talk about outer agility. So there's the inner game of agility, and yes, we make allusions to aspects of the inner game of agility. We might say things like mindset or be agile. Don't just do agile, but be agile. How many of you have heard that, admonishment? How many of you have used that admonishment? And we don't necessarily, I would assert, by the way, I'm going to make a lot of assertions here, right? And I don't, if we had, a lot of time, I can actually provide evidence for these assertions. So you're just going to have to accept them as assertions. I would assert that for the most part, we're not in the Agile world, we're not as well informed about what it takes to bring about inner agility as we are around what it takes to bring outer agility. I would make that assertion. Now, I'm going to also make an assertion, which is actually borne out by psychology, that the inner game of whatever it is always determines the outer game. The outer game is a product of the inner game, right? So I'm not saying, okay, actually, I'll use that as an example. So I was a software developer for many, many years. And the thing about software development is that software development, as we understand it in terms of modern software engineering, would be impossible without some quality of inner game that we call, or that psychologists call, formal operations. So formal operations points to an aspect of, it's an inner aspect, it's an inner game. The ability to think in terms of abstractions is an aspect of the inner game of software development. So we're going to be sort of evoking aspects of the inner game of agility, perhaps more generally. So I want to, so in a sense, this session is asking the question, what is inner agility? And sorry, trying to get back to the slide here. And how might we cultivate it? All right. So I'm not going to explain inner agility. Instead, I want to try to evoke it here through a series of kinds of activities and articulations. So again, I want to invite you to take this personally, to really use this as an occasion to look at yourself, because ultimately, our capacity for inner agility is an individual capacity. Yes, it's a collective capacity. And one way to think about it is that it ultimately starts with me. It ultimately starts here. And so I'm going to invite you to be really honest with yourself, as we move through this stuff. Notice when the thought comes up for you, oh, I already know this. Oh, I've already heard this. Oh, this is, I read about this in a book, or I had this experience. So consider, yes, that may all be true, and consider that that may or may not be relevant for what we're doing here. Okay, cool. All right. So we want to start with those moments. So we want to start experientially, right? And we want to start with those moments in which you recognize that something just happened. And it was something that happened that was unpleasant in some way, in a small way, in a big way, a tiny thing. Consider that our days are filled with these moments in which we might pause just very briefly, what just happened? And by the way, I'm going to walk through this, and then we're going to go through this again, and you're going to do some work with this. All right. So I'll give you a little bit of an example as we go through this first round of this. So there's a quality. It might be surprising. It might be ambiguous, right? Ambiguity really means that it could be this, but it could be that. We don't really quite know. It could be any number of things, right? Unpredictable, right? So there are things that happen that we didn't predict and that we couldn't possibly have predicted. So this is a little bit like surprising. Tenuous. So there's something about that moment or this moment that we're not quite sure how we feel. It's a little bit we just don't know. It could be paradoxical, right? It could present itself in terms of a number of different ways of thinking about it, or it could be just plain volatile, maybe explosive, right? So there are any number of these sorts of qualities to what just happened, right? And so for me, I'll give you an example. I'm just going to give you a simple example. So earlier today, I had my wife and I had planned to take a little walk in the woods here. I live here in Stockholm, Sweden, and there's lots of woods and forests here. And it was like around 3:00 that we were going to do this. And so 3:00 came, and we started to get ready, and I was like really looking forward to this because it's been such a full day, and I thought, oh, it would be nice to take a 20-minute walk. And Suzanne, my wife, was really, in a terrible mood, if I may say so. And so it was a surprise. She was kind of grumpy and short with me, and so there was a lot of it was surprising. It was paradoxical, perhaps a bit volatile. And then, so there's what just happened and then what we experience. And the experience could be anxiety. It could be confusion or anger. When this happened, with my wife, I actually felt angry. Now the experience comes immediately with, that quality. So the feeling comes immediately with that experience of what happens. Could be embarrassed, right? Or stupid. We might experience feeling stupid or ashamed or maybe depressed. So there's any number of sort of feelings or experiences things that we experience, right? So there's what just happened, what we experience, and then what do we do, right? And this is sort of the kicker. Oftentimes what we do is that we cover it up. We cover up our experience, or we dress it up, or we make it look good. All right. So again, be looking at maybe possible examples for yourself. I'm going to invite you to actually work through it in just a moment. But check it out for yourself, that oftentimes in these moments that are unpleasant, uncomfortable, surprising, difficult, challenging, what we do is we have some way that we cover it up. And then we cover up that we covered it up. Right? Now, again, I'm asking you to be really honest with yourself, right? See if you can see this for yourself. By the way, this is not my highfalutin ideas. This is based on lots and lots of research from the area of adult developmental psychology and organizational behavioral psychology. And so there's a whole bunch of fields that talk about this, right? We cover up that we cover it up, and then we sometimes, in fact, oftentimes we collude with each other in that cover up. So, by the way, I just heard a snapshot. I can make these slides. Let me know how I can make these slides available after the session to everybody, if that would be interesting. So, and feel free to take snapshots. So all of this stuff brings up its own emotions and reactive states. Now, this is a point I was going to make in just a moment, but I feel like I want to make it now. All of this, what happens is it creates a kind of culture. It's the sort of cultural water that we swim in. And we're like the fish in water. We're not aware, or we're not really completely aware that this is going on. And yet all of this is going on moment by moment by moment. Okay, I'll say more about that in just a minute. So, okay, so first of all, before we go into this activity, any questions so far? Like just questions like, I don't understand this, because in a moment you're going to trace through and actually do some reflective work for yourself. So questions, just, like, I don't understand about this, we don't want to get into a philosophical conversation yet. We can do that a bit later, but just like questions, I don't understand this, and this is not clear. Because you're going to do a little work with this in just a moment. You may need to somehow get my attention, because I don't have a way of looking at the texts or the chat. So I don't know.
No one type anything so far.
Okay, good. So that I presume then that we're good. Okay, great. Okay, so so think of an event that happened today or yesterday that was in some way unpleasant. It resulted in some unsatisfactory outcome of some kind. It could be something big, it could be something small. And I want you to be, honest about this. And this kind of activity works best if you actually write it down or type it somehow. So I'm going to give you some time to actually work through this. So, so the first part is like, what's the quality of what happened? And it could have maybe more than one of these. So you want to write down what happened, I had a scheduled walk with Suzanne, and things didn't go as I had expected. So you want to write down, what happened. And you want to write down, like, what was the quality of that? It could be one of these or something like it. What sort of quality had it be unpleasant for you? So take a moment to do those two things. What happened and what was the quality? I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. Again, you'll want to write this down. This kind of activity works far better when you do that. if you just joined us, we're doing an activity and inviting you to look at something that happened very recently, today or yesterday, and want to write down what happened and what was the quality. It could be any number of these or similar adjectives. Now you may continue writing as I go to this next question. The next question is, what did you experience? What was your, I guess you could say, your internal experience? What was maybe the quality of feeling that you had, or maybe a combination of feeling and a way of thinking? You might have felt ashamed, or maybe stupid, confused. You want to be honest. Nobody's going to look at this. Again, if you've just joined us, we're in the middle of an activity that we're a little too far into it now to explain it. So just kind of hang loose. And then look at, what did you do with that? Specifically, how did you cover it up, or dress it up, or make it look good? Sometimes we might talk about it with somebody, maybe something somebody did that annoyed us. We might talk about it with them, and we might use pseudo collaborative language, but it's secretly we're kind of casting blame on them in some way. So we're pretty subtle. We're psychologically sophisticated animals, us 21st century. Those of us in California, and I say that because I am from California. So we're very sophisticated, but you want to be honest and authentic with yourself. And then as you continue to reflect on that question, you might ask yourself, did you then cover up the cover up somehow? Not all of these questions will be ripe in this moment, but some of them will. And for some of us, all of them will. So the way that I covered it up is that what happened with me is that I in turn got rather grumpy. And what I came to discover is that my wife was actually feeling rather blue. And I felt ashamed that I got sort of grumpy with her, and I covered it up by sort of, explaining, that, that I was just feeling tired and overwhelmed, and which is just a form of justification. So there are many ways that we cover things up. So take a look at it for yourself. And maybe you colluded somehow with someone in that cover up. Oftentimes when we have difficult topics of conversation that we avoid in close relationships, we both collude in avoiding that, so we cover up that the topic is uncomfortable, and then we cover up our cover up, and we do it together, and it just becomes this avoided thing, and our lives start to become quite populated with all of these strategies and for covering up, and as postmodern people working and operating in postmodern companies, we've become very sophisticated at this. And Chris Argyris, who I'll mention in just a moment, he used to talk about consultants, and he wrote articles about people who provide expertise and how they are better at this game than anybody. And so the more professional you are, quote unquote, the better you are at this, the research seems to find. Okay. So I want to just maybe stop sharing for a moment. And I'd like to hear from a few of you. And here's what I would like, how I would like this to go, if it's possible, is I'd like to hear from a couple of you and in order to do that, of course, obviously you'll need your microphone and your camera on. And we won't do long interactions here, but I may interact with you just a little bit. So who would be brave enough and disclosive enough?
Actually, Michael, do you mind if I make a suggestion?
Sure.
So for those of you who prefer not to turn the camera on or the audio on, you also have the option to just type it in the chat. We do want to include you if you want to share.
Okay. It would be harder for me to interact with somebody that way, and that's totally fine too.
I will help you, Michael. I will help read it out.
Okay. So meanwhile, who is brave enough and willing to share what you came up with?
Hi, Priya here from New Zealand. I can share.
Priya, hi. Thank you. Thank you for your bravery.
No worries. It happened yesterday in the dinner. So I went to work for a full day workshop. So when I came home, I was very tired. But my husband has made this amazing dinner, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
I was very tired. He tried a new recipe. I came home. I was very hungry and angry because I was in a 6-hour full day workshop. I wanted to eat something. And I tasted it. It was not edible. It was not very good.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that he has given some effort into making that dish. So I was like, oh, this is really good. Thanks for making. And I tried to eat and was still mad. So I just covered up the whole thing. And I was thinking to myself, why can't I just tell him that, hey, what you did was not very good, but probably I didn't want to hurt his feeling because he did give it a try, and he doesn't cook often. So he cooked something. There is a good news to the story. I didn't tell him yesterday that it was not very good, but I did tell him the following day saying that, hey, that recipe was not the right recipe to use. You used wrong ingredients. It was not that good.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, why didn't you tell me yesterday? It's like, oh, I don't want to hurt your feeling, but I can see how, and it's so easy to cover up because I think it was, I'm being very empathetic towards someone and doing it, and not actually being real and giving them what needs to be done.
Yeah. Thank you. I really just so appreciate your, your authenticity and your disclosiveness in that. And I think that you already know this. I'd like to suggest that it was really great that you kind of said what you said the next day. I guess that was today. And really good relationships operate that way, right? And I'm going to be a bit provocative, and we're going to come to sort of a way of thinking about this. I invite you to consider, and everybody else who kind of relates to this, to consider that when we don't speak truthfully in the moment, the opportunity is missed. There's a missed opportunity. Now, we haven't put things quite together yet to talk about how to share something like this with somebody, right? So hopefully we'll add some more pieces as the session continues, so that we can do that. So anything like in response to what I just now suggested, quite provocatively, Priya?
I think it's not more about the inner agility. I think it's about how the other person will react. I think we generally react to the people in front of us and how they would take, because I know he has put some effort into it. He's trying something new, and I wanted to encourage him to do more rather than tell them straight away. And this has happened with my kids. Even it has happened with the teams that I coach. My assertion is it's about the self-awareness of how people can take that truth. And as a humanity, I don't think so we are ready for truth. We are so modeled to just take what makes you feel good, or what makes others feel good. It's very hard to speak in the moment of truth, because I had been very defensive when someone gave me the truth, and I've seen other people being defensive when I give the truth. So it's very, very hard. I don't know how, as a human species, we can get away from it.
Right. So consider, Priya, that the notion that if you were to say something like that to your husband, that it would hurt his feelings, consider that that's an assumption that you have. And that part of what we do, part of the grand cover-up, is that, for instance, I will avoid embarrassing you if you avoid embarrassing me. This is where the collusion comes in. Mm-hmm. I will avoid saying something to you that might be provocative in some way if you do the same. And we have this sort of silent agreement in most of our relationships. By the way, I'm not saying this as though it's true, right? So I don't want to, I'm asking you to consider that as a possibility. And in speaking with you, Priya, I have a feeling I'm speaking with a number of other people here. Cool.
Yeah, I can see it feels like we are trying to avoid the conflict. So it's not that I want to hurt his feeling, it's a conflict I was trying to avoid.
Yeah, and if I can provoke you even further, consider that your concern was more for your own feelings and your own fear than for anything over there. So,
yep.
so awesome. So, incidentally, so we don't have time to do a lot of this kind of work, but the kind of work that Priya and I just now did is referred to as deliberate sense making, and we'll allude to it later on. But since it showed up, I'm going to say something about it. Deliberate sense making is a manner of engaging with something that happened in a way that starts to reveal underlying beliefs, assumptions, theories, emotional triggers, that are all hidden from us. We don't see them, and we experience their effect. right? And we have all manner of stories and justifications to cover up the essential human embarrassment. It's essentially embarrassing to be a human being. And it's embarrassing and it's hard to expose ourselves. So, so thank you for doing that, Priya, and thank you for giving us a very brief, tiny little moment of deliberate sense making, which I may say more about later if we have time, but we may
Thank you
not.
so much.
Yeah, thank you, Priya. Awesome. So, if you don't mind, I'm going to continue on because I want to unfold this story. So, by the way, just so you know, what among the things that I pay attention to is whether or not an idea landed for people, and so the work that Priya and I just did, and I appreciate Priya so much for this. I have the feeling that it kind of put a nice bow on, or helped, to make some things experientially clear, if not conceptually clear. So I'm going to go on to the next part of this story. All right, so continuing on. So the problem is that when we cover it up, and when we collude with others in doing so, this is, in a sense, I'm summarizing what just sort of got demonstrated with Priya. When we cover it up and when we collude with others in doing so, we create a culture in which we lose the power of awareness. And awareness is the requisite condition for inner agility. To the degree that we're not aware of what it is that's driving us, to the degree we're unaware of the beliefs, the assumptions, the theories about how this person is, how those kinds of people are, how this person will react if I say this thing, all of that, and the various strategies that we engage in covering it up, to the degree we're unaware of all of that, there's no possibility for the kind of inner agility that ultimately we need if we're going to truly have mastery in the area of business, any kind of business agility. So there's another assertion for you, that at the heart of it all is our awareness. And I'll unpack that a little bit more in just a moment here. Okay, so so I'm going to just briefly read this quote from a book. In an ordinary organization, most people are doing a second job no one is paying them for. So I'm just putting the cap on this whole idea because we're going to move on to the next part in just a moment. And most people are spending their time and energy covering up their weaknesses, managing other people's impressions of them, showing themselves to their best advantage, playing politics, hiding their inadequacies, hiding their uncertainties, hiding their limitations, hiding. And this is from the book by Lisa Leahy and Robert Keegan, and Everyone Culture. So just to kind of put the cap on all that. So now we want to kind of examine or say, what is going on here? What's the inner operating system of all of this? Well, we're not going to pause. We'll just pause very briefly, actually. So I want you to consider the following, that it is not us doing these things. They are doing us, right? So it's not us. It's not like we are consciously engaging in all of this sorts of stuff. It's that they do us. In a sense, they are our masters. That it's a condition of human being. And this is a little bit like Chris Argyris. Some of you may know his work, our theories of action. So he was basically an organizational behavioral psychologist, and really an interesting guy. Wrote great books, but he was a very, very powerful facilitator and extremely confrontational in his workshops. A model for me, actually. I love the guy. But he differentiated two theories of action. So a theory of action is, how do we explain what we do and why, right? And there's the espoused theory. So for instance, an espoused theory might be, I believe in open and honest communication, right? That would be an espoused theory, is something that we declare, something that we claim, something that we say. Then there's a theory, the theory in use, the actual theories that informs our action. And those theories in use are theories of which we are completely unaware, and yet they determine our action. So this is why I say that these are things that we don't do, they do us. So I'm saying that in a curious way because I want us to clearly understand the nature of things here. We're not talking about things that we can learn conceptually and then through the application of concepts suddenly be able to do. So inner agility doesn't work that way. Okay, so let's take this apart. So I'm going to use the metaphor of an operating system. So it's like, on our phones, we use our phones and all kinds of apps, like we use, we call people on the phone, we look at news, we read email, we do all kinds of stuff with our phones using all kinds of apps, completely unaware that there's an underlying operating system. And yet that operating system determines everything that you're able to do with your phone. It determines literally the behavior of those apps and which apps can run and which apps can't. And from time to time, you need to upgrade that operating system. And so ultimately what we're talking about here is upgrading the inner operating system such that we are able to act in a way that is essentially more agile, that is more responsive, that is more adaptive, that is ultimately more intelligent. So consider that there's this inner operating system. And you could think of it as that it has an application layer. So the application layer constitutes our actions and our behaviors. So all the things that we do, what we do in the world, from moment to moment to moment to moment, right? Our actions, what we say to people, how we converse with people, all of that stuff, right? That's the kind of like what we do, is the territory of what we do. And then underneath all of that and informing all of that is an operating system layer that we're going to take apart. So in that operating system, the most readily accessible, the most noticeable, the sort of the frontline operating system services are the skills and competencies that we have, right? What we can do, right? And this is the domain in which most training operates, by the way. So for instance, when maybe a manager goes to a participative management class, and they learn techniques for participative management. There are all kinds of techniques, and techniques-based trainings are very, very useful and good, but they only work to the degree that the underlying operating system, this hidden layer, or you could say the kernel of the operating system, it can support those competencies and abilities. And so let's unpack this hidden layer, because this, in a sense, is what we need to be able to get access to in order to have access to this domain that I'm calling inner agility. This is the domain of where inner agility is most accessible and most powerfully activated. So there are our beliefs, our assumptions, and our theories. So we just had a little bit of a demonstration of that for instance, I have a belief that I might have an espoused belief that, I believe in honest and open communication, but when in the heat of the moment, when the moment feels hot, the belief that has me, the theory in use essentially, is that if I open my trap in this moment, I'm going to get in trouble or something's going to happen. So I have a fear of what could happen if I were to open my mouth. And so assumptions and theories, so I'm not going to get deeply into it, but just to give you a little bit of a taste of this, all of these operate in the background. For the most part, we're unaware, and they snap in place in literally in like milliseconds. way faster than we could possibly become aware of unless we slow things down. We'll come to that in just a moment. There are emotional triggers, right? Somebody says something, makes a certain look, and it triggers an emotion in us, and all of which leads to this engaging of the kinds of strategies that we were talking about a moment ago, right? So all of this is in the domain of how we make meaning, to use a terminology from adult developmental psychology, or to say it more accurately, how meaning makes us. So this is not meaning that we consciously make, it's meaning that makes us. It's literally like a machine operating in the background, and to the degree that we are unaware of it, we do its bidding. I know that sounds harsh, or it may sound harsh, or it may sound really deterministic. And it is somewhat deterministic, right? That's the nature of the egoic mind. It's like a machine. Now, here's the thing. So, of course, how meaning makes us constitutes what we can do, which constitutes what we do. All right. Now, here's the moment of hope, or moment of human volition, existential volition, which is that we, to the degree that we have awareness of the inner beliefs, assumptions, theories, triggers, and strategies that constitute how we operate, to the degree we have awareness of those things, it becomes possible to be at choice, and to be, and I'm going to use a philosophical word. I'm sorry, I use these sorts of words, just how it is with me sometimes. Existential choice, which is choice in the moment, choice in relation to how I'm going to be. You know, so for instance, for me to have had awareness of what was going on in relation to the thing that happened with my wife earlier, it brought about the choice to be able to fess up to her what was going on, what my inner strategy was. And it was hard, you know, because she gave me a lot of critical feedback around it. But the thing is it created an opening, a space for authentic relationship. And that's the effect of what I'm referring to as existential choice. So finally, we're saying what inner agility is, in case some of you have been holding your breath all this time. Inner agility arises from the so notice that it arises from, we haven't actually defined what inner agility is. I don't know actually that we will in this session, even though it seems like maybe we promised it. But you can't really define it anyways. It's something that you sort of start to get at. It's like most truths in life can only really be hinted at for the most part, right? And we get a feel for it, and then it goes away, and then we get a feel for it, but it takes practice. And so inner agility arises from the cultivation of this quality of awareness and the existential choices it makes available to us at each and any given moment. So I'm going to say something a little bit more about deliberate sense making, and then I'm going to stop, and we're going to open this up for a conversation. So just to say very briefly, we had just the tiniest of tastes of deliberate sense making with Priya. So deliberate sense making helps us reveal the inner beliefs, assumptions, theories, and triggers which determine our thinking and our actions, right? Now, deliberate sense making is most often done with another person. And there are a set of practices. So there are very specific practices, and we don't have time to get into that here, but there are very specific conversational and relational practices. It's not a lot. It's actually far less complicated than one might think, because basically it's about taking a pause. And again, it works really, really well when you do this with another person, but you can also do this on your own. taking a pause and being willing to tell the truth. What would have to be true in order for my way of operating in a given moment to be justified? I feel like that question didn't make sense. So don't, if you got it, that's okay. If you didn't, that's okay too, because really we don't have time to get into it. But the basic idea here is that it's about revealing the inner beliefs. It's that revealing that inner sphere. It's being authentic and engaging in particular conversations that elicit this sort of awareness. And it helps equip ourselves to transcend and hold, to be able to transcend those and to come to a place of choice in the matter. Okay, so let's see what all of this has evoked with people. So I'm gonna, no more slides. I want to, we have about what, 25 minutes, correct? One way.
That's right. That's right.
So I want to open this up to conversation, and we'll see how many of you we can, take questions, or maybe your observations or something you want to share, anything. So the floor is open.
So Mahesh said that this fascinating topic, it sounds like it ties in well with psychological safety.
It does. Although I would want to ask him in what way, if I can just maybe be clear before I respond. Is that possible? Is he able to?
Hello.
Where are you? Ah, Mahesh.
Hi. Yeah, so I was on the bus earlier, joined from my phone. I'm at work. I'm in New Zealand, and I've got into my, eventually got in via my laptop.
Yeah, I love New Zealand. Awesome. Cool. So
thank you.
So say more about that. So how does this make you think of psychological safety? By the way, okay, so I'm actually exercising deliberate sense-making practices right now. Notice that I'm asking Mahesh to reveal his thinking, his assumptions, and his theories behind what he said, so that we can engage in a deeper conversation potentially. Okay.
Sure. Thank you, Michael. For me, I feel that the ability to be open and bring your authentic self and almost speak incredibly candidly without fearing that the recipient or your audience is going to act in a negative way, and that you care for each other and you are being open and honest, in the sense that the worst thing that's going to happen is going to end in you're going to having a conversation, rather than you're going to lose your job, or you're going to get fired, or there's going to be some sort of negative aspect to this. And it's about receiving the information at the right time, so then you can act appropriately, you can react or act to that information you're receiving. And it might affect it. I work as an agile coach or scrum master, a little bit like Priya. It helps in the industry we're working to get the information, get the ideas and thoughts out at the right time. Certainly from a planning perspective, we're looking at risks and things of that nature. So from a work perspective, I feel it works. So I'm rambling a bit now, but hopefully this is making sense to somebody.
Let me just interrupt you. I'm sorry. Actually, for the sake of time, I am gonna interrupt you. So forgive me, because what I want to ask you is that so I think all right, and let me just ask the question. How do you know that it's safe?
How do you know that it's? I think there's a number of triggers. There's body language. There's it's really about what's being said, and more often than what's not being said. So if conversation isn't flowing, and people aren't saying anything, yeah, we're all humans. We all have emotions, and we'll react emotionally, but we may not necessarily verbalize that. That for me is it's looking at human behavior and understanding what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, where the engagement is.
So the only trick in all of this, Mahesh, is again, to the degree that we're unaware of the beliefs, assumptions, and theories that we might have about, what certain body signals signify, and even what it means for us to feel safe. Like a lot of us, most of us, I would say, don't really know what it is that has us feel safe. And so sometimes what I've seen is that psychological safety can be another way of covering up the cover up, right? So I'm not saying, I think, obviously Amy Edmondson, by the way, I studied her work years before she did anything with what she called psychological safety. She's a brilliant researcher and a brilliant thinker. And I suspect that she would, I don't know if she would agree with this, but I don't know that she would disagree, that it can be its own trap, right? We come to cultural agreements, right? Hidden agreements, all based on, hidden beliefs, assumptions, theories, triggers, right? There are cultural triggers, just as there are individual triggers. There are culturally held beliefs, which then become and actually are activated by individual beliefs. So it's a bit complex in the psychological level. It's systemic, right? It's a systemic phenomenon. And to the degree that we're unaware of all of that, we may be had by this thing we're calling psychological safety. I'm not saying that that is necessarily the case with you or with anybody necessarily, but it can be, and I've seen it actually happen many, many, many times.
I think you might have opened a can of worms up there. I think my comment was more, it was resonating with me what you were saying. I think it's a fascinating topic, as I said, and the time we've got probably isn't going to do it justice. I just feel that there's it ties in quite well as almost like a prerequisite to what you're discussing. Let's start somewhere. Let's get people opening up and feeling a little bit safer. But as you say, it starts from within.
Yeah.
And it's that comfort level. It's really, really hard. I like the way you're putting me on the spot now. You're asking me the questions, and I'm pretty open. I'm just a northern lad. That's how we are. But as Priya was saying earlier,
well, so
not everyone
again,
thinks in the same way.
Just know, by the way, it's really hard to watch what comes out of our mouth. So that's a theory that you have. That's how we are.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So, by the way, I'm mainly having fun with you, Mahesh, and I'm using
I know you are
now as a foil to get a certain, complex idea across here. So I apologize, because in a way I'm kind of using you a little bit in this conversation. And but I wouldn't do that if I didn't have the sense that you could do that with me. So I appreciate you for doing that.
Listen, my wife calls me a pig. You're using me as your guinea pig. That's perfectly fine. That's fine.
Right. Well, I don't quite know what her reference is, and I'm not going to.
I think it's a cooking reference. Anyway, it's by the by anyway. Listen, looks like there's a couple of other questions coming along here.
Yeah, I see that.
Thank you
Okay,
so much, Mahesh. So Barry, I know you have your hands up for a while.
All right, please. Hey, Barry, good to see you.
Hey, Michael, good to see you. I was just keying on something Mahesh was saying, and I wanted to check this with you and with y'all. A few times Mahesh said it, talking about, psychological safety and knowing how to give the feedback at the right time for it to be received. And what I was thinking about with that, of kind of looking at it in the other direction, am I right in understanding that, like, developing inner agility, what you're talking about, this awareness of our own meaning making, is kind of like expanding the right time for ourselves? What, if I have this awareness, there's much more right time for me to receive input and feedback, because I'll be able to receive that as, and question my, thoughts, beliefs, assumptions, without jumping into a more reactive or just missing it. Does that fit what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. So right now we're having a sense-making conversation, right? And in which we're creating sense together. So I can never presume that I know what you mean, but I can respond to what I heard you say, or at least what I make up that I heard you say. And what I would say to that is that the more we engage in these kinds of practices, it's like we exercise a muscle, right? And at first it feels kind of awkward and difficult, and we keep falling back into the old record groove, because that, the human patterns, those deep hidden psychological patterns have been with us as human beings for a very, very long time, long before your grandparents are around, long before your great-grandparents were around. This is what it is to be human, is to be owned by the hidden beliefs, assumptions, triggers, and theories that, in a sense, were never ours. We got born into it, right? And to the degree that we can become aware of that which is, I'm going to say this in a funny way, to the degree that we can become aware of that which is using us, that theory of what it is to be human, what it is to be related, what it is to work, what it is to make a difference in the world, that we're used by all of that, that we didn't choose. Are you following that?
Mm-hmm.
To the degree that we can become aware of all of that, then suddenly the possibility for existential choice comes in. I can actually choose how I want it to be in this relationship. I can actually choose how I want it to be with my work. And it's a muscle that gets exercised. So I'm saying back, kind of rhyming back what I kind of understood you to say when you said about enlarging the moment.
So it's a matter of being aware of where our automatic choices are coming from, aware of the fact we're making automatic choices, so that we can step back and make deliberate, intentional choices, or at least attempt to.
That's right. That's right. And to the degree that we can clean up the messes, that get made out of us acting from the place of those, automatic beliefs, assumptions, theories, and triggers, to the degree that we can clean it up with people, it creates a profound quality of relationship. And the more of those kinds of relationships we have around us, the more kind of psychological safety starts to become possible.
Great, thank you.
That was a lot. I know that was a okay. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Barry. So we have Stephen actually type in the chat, and he asked, where is what we love to do in the human sense-making OS?
Oh, Stephen, hello. Long time no see.
Michael,
Yeah,
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. So say your question again, and then I might need to ask for clarity.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about like the 3-layer model, the operating system, human sense-making operating system, and the idea of awareness of those very internal components of ourselves, that pause that gives us a choice. And also understand that a lot of these behaviors are driven, and often, we don't think about it. And I was thinking, how do I be more intentional about how I love and how I do the things that I love as part of this operating system?
Yeah, so yeah, it's such an interesting question. And consider, notice, by the way, I use the word consider a lot, because I'm not asking anyone to accept anything as a truth, but more like, I want to offer frames or lenses that you can look through in your life or your world, for the next day or so, and just see what shows up, looking at it through the lens. So consider that much of what we love is a product of, I'm going to say something that might sound really indelicate, is a product of some belief, assumption, or theory, or something that we're trying to avoid. some uncomfortable quality of experience that we're trying to avoid. And some of these are really quite obvious, like in Sweden. I live in Sweden right now, and the big thing in Sweden is Friday night, cozy taco night, right? So they love to have American kind of style or Swedish style tacos, which I've actually come to love since being here, strangely enough, because I'm a big Mexican food aficionado. But so that's something that people love, and but it's also a product of sometimes. By the way, I don't want to poo-poo the need for comfort, and sometimes we can escape to the things that we love. We can escape from something that may be uncomfortable or may be confronting. We may be escaping from an emotional quality or a mood. We often, as human beings, there's certain moods we avoid like the plague, and we literally construct our entire lives around avoiding having to be present with those moods. I speak from personal experience on this, right? So all right, so there's that. Sorry, Stephen, I'm just going to add one last thing. And so something that's not in this model that I've just shared with you is, like authentic human being, so underlying all of this, and then thank you for bringing this humanity to the conversation, Stephen. You evoked it by your question. That underlying all of this is the possibility for authentic human being, to be authentic. But authenticity is not possible until we confront our inauthenticity, until we come to grips with and tell the truth about all this stuff that we're talking about, right? And incidentally, to the degree that we're able to ground ourselves in our authentic being, that's where inner agility happens. That's where the capacity to respond to whatever happens around us, and we don't get ruffled, and we're able to dance with what is, and our dance is always super effective and super generative and super inspiring, right? When we come from that place of authenticity, that's where inner agility, as a kind of a mastered super capacity starts to come online. Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Beautiful.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Priya, I know that you still have questions, so you'd like to ask a question?
Priya's back for more.
Of course. I have a two-part question.
Okay.
The first one is we discussed about the self-awareness. It's I think it's one of the hardest one in being a human. First of all, this is my assumption. First of all, not many people understand what self-awareness is, or they can think for themselves. I have been so attuned to not thinking about self-awareness and blaming everything and everyone for whatever actions I took. But thankfully, I've read so many books and I've started reflecting back on self-awareness. It's not an easy job. It's, as Michael, you rightfully said, it's the hardest thing is to look inside yourself and bring all the what's and stuff that you want to always present good. And it's very hard to be an authentic human. So my first question is, how do we cultivate for people around you to have that self-awareness? Because I think if more and more people have self-awareness, it's going to be a lot easier for us to be authentic, and it will be easier for us to not worry about how they would take, because this is my hypothesis, thinking that we cover up because we are worried how others will perceive us. And you need a lot of strength to own yourself in whatever truth you stand. And it's not easy. I think it's one of the hardest thing humans can do, owning your truth.
Yeah.
So what can we do, or how can we support ourselves and others to own our truth?
Yeah. So it's a question that so beautifully presented, and incidentally, I really want to acknowledge actually like a kind of a shift in how you're being versus how you were just a moment ago, like or a little while ago. Like something seems to have shifted in you. Like I'm experiencing you as as having the capacity to own your shit, as they say. And so really, really, really cool on that. And to get to your question, it almost always comes back to us. So, okay, so there are a couple things. So first of all, there's the notion of skillful means, and which is the ability to skillfully engage with others in order to bring about conditions in which that sort of self-awareness arises with others, right? So there's a skillfulness aspect to this, right? And a competence. So there's that aspect, but there's also always who we are being. So consider that what shows up. So this is, again, another one of those, consider this, right, as a lens. Consider that what shows up around us is a product of our own meaning making, of where we are, of how we are operating. And so to the degree that we exercise that muscle and self-awareness, and by the way, you're absolutely right, that self-awareness is actually really difficult because, like, where do we find it? It's not like looking for your keys. Oh shit, where are my keys? I don't know where they are. You know, it's not like looking for your keys. The self is not someplace to be found. It arises in the very conversations and activities by which we examine ourselves. And so it's a commitment to ongoingly examining ourselves and telling the truth about ourselves, which you are clearly doing, Priya. So really
It's
good.
very hard though.
Yeah. Well, so consider that that's a theory. It's hard because it goes against the grain of the everyday humanness that we are. And to engage in these kinds of questions in the way that you are is a powerfully activating condition for what I'm calling inner agility. Great.
Thank you.
And
You answered my second question with your first answer itself.
we got there somehow. Glad it worked.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you, Priya. And Glenn actually made a comment, and
Okay.
Glenn says, perhaps there are layers of psychological safety, starting with oneself being comfortable bringing up uncomfortable things about our choices.
Yeah. I would agree. I would agree wholeheartedly that at the heart of psychological safety, it's a paradoxical truth that, you know, that when we are able to challenge ourselves and other people, it creates safety, and that safety in turn then creates the possibility for challenging one another. I don't know if that resonates with what you're suggesting, Glenn.
I'm thinking that it might start with psychological safety with oneself, being comfortable with bringing up uncomfortable things in a kind way, of course.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you don't hear. But maybe that's the root of psychological safety that some people miss.
Yes. And can you say it again, because it's such a powerful thought that it deserves to be articulated.
Sure, I'll try. It feels like psychological safety starts with ourselves, and we need to be comfortable in a kind way, bringing up uncomfortable things. And you said it well earlier, you have to slow down to hear, first of all, and that's a key component of psychological safety. And if we start practicing that with ourselves, then we're leading by example in terms of having psychological safety with a team. But of course, it's circular. If you're with a team that's very psychologically safe, it might start from the outside and work in. But we can certainly start from the inside and work out as coaches.
Yeah, I would say on principle, I completely agree with what you're saying there, and I would add that what it is that creates that It's a complex. At some point, we have to open our mouths and say something, I think is what I would say in all of that. That at some point, there's something to be said to somebody. There's a speaking and a listening that's a sort of key to this. We're in a very nuanced area of all of this, Glenn. It's a very rich and powerful area, and I wish we had more time to look at this, because I can feel the depth and seriousness of this thought that you're communicating right now.
And I think you just had one more thought that's kind of related. Of course, we need to be kind about it, but truth itself, we need to be kind about how we deliver it. But being truthful is a form of kindness.
Indeed, it is. And when we can let go of, or when we can, if we're willing, as long as we're willing to examine what constitutes kindness for us. See, we have to question everything, because so much of how it is, quote unquote, is determined by these hidden beliefs, assumptions, theories, and triggers and strategies of avoidance and all of that stuff, right? So we have to be, we have to engage in Socratic dialogue with ourselves and with each other. And to my way of thinking, to the degree that we can bring those sorts of practices into the everydayness of the work that we do, it's going to make us much more powerful, much more effective, and agilists.
And if I hope we're not going on here, but there's also a individual dimension to this, in that truth, what we think of as an absolute truth, in fact, is subjective, and different people have different views of the same thing at the same time.
Right. So, and again, if we had more time, we would want to talk about what we mean by subjectivity, because we have now, you and I might have a certain way of thinking about subjectivity, but for the most part, when we think about subjective experience, the way we think about it has been inherited from Descartes, the philosopher, and it's amazing to the degree to which his thinking has defined how we understand the nature of consciousness. Even using the word inner agility, I cringe sometimes. I don't like using that word because it's a much more subtle, sort of dialectical, systemic interaction between inner and outer than can be suggested if we just use the word inner or outer.
I was thinking more in terms of confirmation bias and stuff like that.
Yeah. No, I get it.
Thank you so very much, Glenn, and thank you very much, Michael. Now, we still actually have more comments and questions. What I would suggest is we're actually going to close, because we would actually like to get some feedback from all of you first. And then if Michael is still have the energy, and the rest of you want to stay a little bit after, then we can actually get to, I believe, one more comment and one more question afterwards, if that is okay.
Sure, yeah, that's fine. And another option too is if there are more, I mean, I could stay for a couple of questions. If there are more questions or comments, if there's a way for you to share them with me, yeah, because I would want to be able to, I don't think that would really work. Never mind.
Yeah, well, we can think of that and see if there's a way possible. But we want to thank you, Michael, for such an inspirational talk. And before we end, we do, as I mentioned, want some quick feedback, and we are using Mentimeter to solicit your feedback. So it's the same Mentimeter before. It's on the screen. You can use the QR code, or you can use the link that is in the chat. All right. So the first question we'd like to ask you is, what were you hoping for when you joined the session? Sort of insights and perspectives. Anything else? Inspiration? New ideas? Absolutely. New insights. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Ooh, to learn. Connections. Brilliant. Wow, it's coming in a lot faster now. Learning, connection, community. Okay. Discover something new. Thank you so very much. All right, let's go to the next question. To what degree did this session meet your expectations? Ooh, doing well, very well. Thank you so much. Yay. All right. Next question, please. How useful was this meetup? Oh, that's a wrong slide. There we go. Good. All right. Very nice. Okay, and the last question. What is the one takeaway that you're walking away with?
I apologize. Menti is moving without me even triggering it.
Wow. All right, what is the one takeaway that you're walking away with? Oh, that's interesting.
What? Something's going on with Menti.
Yeah, that is not supposed to happen.
Yeah,
Uh,
I see it happening in the Menti dashboard, but it's not happening on the thing. Let me see if I can refresh this.
yeah, so what I'm seeing actually is says think more, practice more self-awareness, agility takes awareness. There's always more to learn about yourself. Keep focusing on self-awareness. Someone says just one takeaway. Awareness is a requisite to in agility. I knew I had a lot of work to do. I have even more work to do than I thought. Okay. Well, thank you very much. So this meetup is officially ending. So for those of you who need to leave, thank you so very much. For those of you who can stay behind a little bit, we are actually going to address one comment and one more question. So Stephen, you made a comment that says, this is interesting to me also. Thank you, Glenn. Speak truthfully in the moment. I often think about and feel through what is just enough truth, not to lose them or myself. Shared value systems.
By the way, I just want to just say, maybe people have already left. I just want to thank you, Munwei, and the other organizers for this. I had a really wonderful time, and thank you for everyone for being here, and those with whom I spoke and interacted, and those who I didn't, whose presence I felt very much. So thank you, everybody.
All right. And Barry, you actually have a question. Says, how do you see this idea of individual sense making relate to organizational sense making? For example, Carl Wick's ideas.
Yeah. Okay.
And this may be a much deeper conversation. I was just curious if
Well, so I see that there's a very, very powerful connection between the two. And in fact, to my mind, they're really sort of almost undifferentiable. But that's from how I'm looking at it, right? I suspect Carl Weick may not see it that way. And by the way, I have been for the last 20 years a huge student of Carl Weick's work. I have read and reread pretty much all of his books, and back when I was studying organizational development and organizational theory and all that stuff, and he's an amazing man. And so I would say that there is a very, to my way of thinking, it's a little bit like the back of the hand, front of the hand. They're just sort of, two sides of one deep, essential sort of truth, if you will.
I was kind of curious of so my understanding, recollection, because it's been a few years since I studied it, but Weick's sense making in organizations, and the idea that an organization is enacted through the shared sense making within that organization. And you can extend it to say an organization is in some ways nothing more than a shared set of sense making. It's an interesting idea for me to consider, if we look at that as a larger fractal of individual sense making, to say an individual is nothing more than, or an individual is self-enacted through sense making. Does that fit?
Yeah, totally. I would let me put it this way. It's a very attractive thought. Okay. And it's an evocative, it's an evocative recognition of the inherently systemic nature of all of these things. Individuals are systemically complex, just as organizations are. And I would further, amplify Carl Weick's big point, which is that there is no is organization. In fact, there is no is anything except that which arises through shared sense making with others. The only thing that for which there is an is that bus that's coming at you at 50 miles an hour. That is an is, right? But much of what constitutes our realities are not 50-mile-an-hour buses coming at us. Most of it is that which we construct through our shared sense making, and in the very act of constructing it, we actually make it happen. And which is Carl Weick's big idea, which is I think is essentially true for us as human beings, that we basically cause the reality around us that we believe to be true, and we do it through our speaking. When something comes out of our mouth, we actually create it.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
One last moment. If you have one last comment or questions, please either type in the chat or just unmute and say it out loud. Okay, I think we are all good.
Good.
Thank you so very much, Michael, and